So we've touched on the first intent of this work, which is to discuss the problems. Why don't we walk? So we've discussed that the lack of interjurisdictional pedestrian transportation authority is a reason we don't walk, because there's no conceivable way to easily decide to walk between two cities, usually in Canada. The municipal structures are there to give people basic access within the municipality, and in the future we'll examine why that doesn't work either. But for now, we're saying, why can't you walk between cities in Canada? And there's two reasons. One, and they're both rooted in the fact that this walking between cities in Canada is considered a recreational activity, and this disadvantages the most vulnerable people in our society who can't afford personal transportation, and it also was specifically designed to disadvantage or even attack specific cultures in Canada that value walking by basically building highways to run them over with. So these are the two outcomes. These are the two reasons why we don't walk. But let's examine the other side of the coin. Why don't we walk? Let's walk instead. So what do we do to solve this problem? Well, there are two main ideas of what we can do. One, we need to address this issue head on. So we need to create provincial and federal transportation authorities that consider pedestrianism to be a valid form of interjurisdictional movement. Okay, the reason it needs to be provincial and federal is just exactly that, because it's movement between these jurisdictions. So I need to be able to walk between two cities in Canada. When you're trying to interact between two municipal jurisdictions in Canada, generally you go to the regional or provincial level. So we need to go to them and we need to say, you need to open up a pedestrian part of your transit system. So you need to have, along with the QEW, along with the 400 series highway, you need to have a series of pedestrian highways that allow us to move between municipalities in various provinces, and then the Canadian government, who governs the maritime transportation, air transportation, and transportation around, for example, Highway 1. You also need to develop a federal pedestrian transportation system so that people can walk between provinces. As outrageous as it sounds, to create an authority to allow somebody to walk between provinces as a form of transportation, this is a basic human right that should be guarded, and B, in many cases, this is a treaty right that should be guarded. So how do we actually move this forward? We need to contact those levels of government and get action on those items. The second part, of course, as always, is just information for your own use. So go out there in your local area and look at the municipalities around you, and think about, how would one move between those municipalities on foot? What are the barriers that exist? And possibly even walk along those pathways that may already exist. Go along the Bruce Trail and say, what's preventing somebody from moving on foot from along this trail between municipalities? And especially, there are a lot of areas we'll get into later, jurisdictional borderlands, where different policies and different systems exist that they basically pave over pedestrian access, and they don't end up giving pedestrian access because no specific jurisdiction is responsible for that. And that's exactly the point of having provincial and federal level laws about pedestrian transit and not recreation, because of course, as long as it's recreation, they can just say, oh, well, it's not a park, so you don't need that at that location. So, find out around your area specifically what the issues are, bring those up to your municipal, provincial, and federal representatives and say, here's the problem, here's why I can't move between these two cities, and explain to them why it is your right to be able to move between the cities without explaining why you're doing it. You don't have to say, oh, I work in this other city, or I live in this other city, or I want to visit my family in this other city. You don't have to explain any of that. It is your basic human right to be able to move your body from A to B, and in many cases it's a treaty right to be able to move your body from A to B. So you don't have to explain why you're doing that. You just have to explain, here's the problems that you can solve, and let's move ahead on solving those.